Can Trump cancel World War III? Let's look at the political astrology analysis to decode what's going on the geopolitical stage. Now, a couple of days ago, I did the first part of this video series. And in the first part, we looked at the domestic situation, friends and foes of the second Trump administration. And now, as a couple of days have passed, and we're doing the second part to look at the global stage, all the global foes and rivals and interlocutors and players, you know, everybody from Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un to Netanyahu, all these people we're going to look at in this video and understand how they relate to Trump and the second Trump administration. But in these couple of days, a lot has happened. Things have escalated and people are now talking about being on, you know, the world being on the brink of World War III. Now, I have warned of this escalation basically since the beginning of the year. I've got many videos on this channel where I talk about the dangerous situation, which it corresponds to the Pluto-Mars opposition that is constellated right now at the end of the year, November, December 24. And now it has happened. We're there right now. So where are things going to go next? What's going to happen next? Where is, you know, what is the background? What are the patterns? What is the karmic background of this situation? We need to understand this if we want to have a good overview, a good understanding of where things are going to next. So let's look at the political astrology and let's decode it together in this video. All right, folks, first of all, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Hit the notification button so you don't miss these important updates in this crazy time that we're in. Now, the first thing we want to look at is Trump's astrocartography. This is very useful, right? So you may know astrocartography from if you're trying to understand where to live on the planet, where to move, where to do business, you know, where to have a beautiful vacation with your family, anything like that. Astrocartography is really useful. It tells you which forces get activated in your life. But in political astrology, there's a whole other use for this tool as well. Namely, we can use astrocartography to understand where a person's karmic lines, a politician's karmic lines are. And this is super, super useful, right? It helps us understand, you know, where they're going to be drawn to in terms of finding rivals, opponents, places of self-development, assertion, and so on the geopolitical stage. So for Trump, this is Trump, right? For Trump, we have here, look at this, his Mars line, he has a very strong Mars, right? He has a super strong Mars, Leo Mars. He's super assertive. He doesn't take shit from anybody. His Mars line goes directly through Washington, right? Directly through Washington. Obviously, like, makes a lot of sense. He took the heat to Washington, right? He goes there to drain the swamp, and he literally had like people coming there and you know, rioting and for him that first time when, you know, whatever happened there in the previous election, which you know, I mean, you know, Biden didn't get another, you know, 20 million, whatever, 18 million votes more than any other Democrat candidate before, everybody knows. But be that as it may, you can see that here, his Mars line going through Washington is like him asserting himself, right? Asserting himself. And where else does it go through? It goes through Caracas. It goes down here, you see, and it goes through Caracas. Caracas is what? The capital of Venezuela. Maduro is there, Nicolas Maduro. We're going to look at him a little bit later. This is where Trump asserts himself, right? Like, you know, he's going to come there and clean up and take over, basically. And now, what else? The Mars line, it kind of turns from AC to DC, right? It goes to descendant Mars line. And the descendant Mars line is over here, is this one here, is this one. So this is not where you are assertive, but is where you encounter your opposition, your opponent, right? And where does this go through? It goes through here, you can see here, it goes through China, and this is the red line here, China, and very, very close here, very, very close to Pyongyang, okay? North Korea, China, North Korea. And then what's next to it? Next to it, we got here the Pluto descendant line. This is where you're going to face very, very harsh opposition in terms of not just forceful, not just bellicose opposition, not just like a fighter who wants to fight against you, but power struggle, power games, right? This is a Pluto line. It goes through Beijing. Pluto on the descendant. This is where you're going to face manipulation, power plays, power games, right? And that goes through Beijing. Now, what about Europe? What do you got Europe? In Europe, he's got the MC on Pluto on the MC goes directly through Brussels. Here's Brussels, right? So what's that? Brussels, that's where he's going to be acting as or be seen as a powerful manipulator, somebody who dictates terms, somebody who just goes in there and dictates, this is what's going to happen, right? Somebody who appears as a power player, right? And then he's got the Mars line. You see Mars here? He's got the Mars line going through Eastern Europe, and then it goes down to Greece, and then goes through Africa, all of Africa, okay? So you can see this here. And what's this? This is where you're going to be seen as fighting, as being in a battle, right? He's going to be seen as globally or publicly, right? In his career, in his life, that's the MC. You're going to be seen as being in a battle, right? And that goes through Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe, you got here the Baltic states and whatnot, right? And what about Russia? So Russia is not so far from this line. When you actually look at Moscow, I'm not going to do this here right now, but if you look at Moscow, because you have to bring up all kinds of other techniques, the parans, and there's several azimuth, there's several other kind of techniques in astrocartography, gets quite detailed. When you go to Moscow, you have a lot of, it's just Mars, 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 Mars. Mars North Node, Mars Moon, Mars Sun, Mars, it's just Mars and Pluto. All Mars and Pluto, right? So this doesn't look good for a relationship that you want to have with Moscow or leaders of Moscow. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're going to go through everybody here, as I said, right? We're going to go through everybody to understand what the karma, what Trump's karma is with everybody, right? Because this is really important. Obviously, geostrategic considerations happen based on the big changes and the big shifts of geopolitics, which in turn are based on economics, economic oppositions, and so on and so forth. But all of this is actually grounded in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual domain, in karma, human karma, right? In the archetypes. This is really where everything is grounded on. And this is why when we look at the karmic patterns, which we see in astrology, we understand everything else as well. Everything else falls into place. Okay, so we're going to look at all of these relationships now. Let's start with the allies. Okay, the allies. So the allies are who? Like, the UK, France, those people, right? Let's start with them. So when we look at Keir Starmer, right? Keir Starmer, Donald Trump to Keir Starmer, the leader of Britain, right? The leader of the UK. So this guy, he's putting his Uranus on Donald Trump's ascendant, okay? And he's putting his Mars on Donald Trump's Mercury. Okay, and then he has here too, okay, he has Moon with Jupiter. So on the one hand, they're going to kind of feel good about each other. They're going to be very cordial, very friendly, very, giving. There's a special relationship between the UK and so on and the US. But then on the other hand, the guy, Keir Starmer, he's constantly going to keep doing things which tick Trump off, which Trump is going to feel like this guy is a loose cannon. Right? He's a loose gun. He's doing completely, unpredictable things that are not really sanctioned or approved, right? He's just going to do surprising things all the time. And that will lead them into verbal spats, even into arguments. Like they're going to have big arguments. Mars on Mercury is like verbal arguments, right? And so this is going to happen with these guys. And then over time, he has his Saturn in the opposition to Pluto. This is very, very bad. This means in the long term, they're going to have a very, very difficult falling out, right? And which will take a lot of people with them. Like they will basically, this kind of, it tells you that with the US now turning to America first, kind of turning away from the whole transatlantic, not turning away from the transatlantic thing, but for the US has accepted now under Trump that it's going to be a multipolar world, and has accepted that, okay, it's a multipolar world. We want to be the strongest pole in the world. That's it. But that means that the Europeans, they're not anymore part of our pole. They're now friends, but they're not anymore the same pole as it, or the same kind of unipolar world order as it used to be. So the Europeans are not going to accept that. And you can see that now with this shift happening. Who's now the leader of the globalists? Of the globalists, right, who were Biden and the Democrats obviously were representing them, is going to become the UK. More and more so. It actually was already in the whole Ukraine situation, Russia-Ukraine situation. The force that has been most ardently pushing for Ukraine to attack, right? I have some other analysis videos on this, has always been the UK. Has always been the UK, even more so than Biden. It was always the UK. It was first Boris Johnson, then here Rishi guy, and then now with Keir Starmer even more so. And now it's been the UK that has given the first attacks to Ukraine, right? And told them to shoot, and even sent British, they've sent, there has been like some communications that were intercepted by German officers that show that British officers are actually there already guiding those missiles, right? So they're going to fall out, right? It's going to be like a massive kind of, this is the special relationship will break between the US and the UK in these coming years. That's the first big prediction and the first big insight that we have in this video. Now, what else? Let's look at the relation with Macron, Donald Trump to Macron. So Macron, Emmanuel Macron, well, they knew each other from the beginning. Macron, he has in his own chart, he has a Saturn trine sun, right? So Saturn trine sun people, he gets along with older people very well, right? Especially with older men, right? So you can ask his wife about it. So, no, I'm just kidding. So no, not kidding. So he's gonna, Macron gets along really well with older guys, okay, and he's gonna get along with Trump. He's gonna get along with Trump, but then at the same time, he's going to also act as a limiting force in many ways, okay. This, like, he puts his Saturn on the ascendant. He's gonna be kind of a limiting force all the time. He's gonna try to keep him in the reins. Mars on the Pluto, right? They're going to fight together too. Like, they're going to have some joint operations, probably in Africa, right? In Africa, probably the US they will have some joint operations together militarily as well, right? So that's Macron. I'm not going to look at Scholz from Germany because he's most likely not going to even make it. Like, they have elections coming up in a couple of months in Germany, and he's in a very difficult situation there. We're going to have another video to look at the German election situation. But let's move on to somebody else. Let's move on to, we want to get to Putin and Xi Jinping and Zelensky and everybody to understand what's going to happen next in this situation that they're in right now, right? But there's a few more people that we have to look at. Here's one person who's very important. Mark Rutte. Okay, you might not know this person. Mark Rutte, he is the new boss of NATO. Okay, it was Stoltenberg before, now it's Mark Rutte. This guy is I think he's a Dutch guy, a Dutch from Holland. And this guy, he's super strict, super severe guy, right? Very austere, and he's a bureaucrat too. He's not like he's not a self-made man like Trump, right? He's a bureaucrat, he's an EU bureaucrat. But still, amongst the EU bureaucrats, he's like this super strict and hardcore guy, right? And like, he takes no shit from nobody, right? And he, when you look at this, he's placing his Pluto Uranus directly in a square to Sun and Moon of Trump. He's going to be a major opponent, even though he has his Jupiter here, right, on the Saturn. So on the Venus, he's going to be a major opponent, right? They also have Saturn square Saturn at the same time. Basically, look, this guy, his whole mission, his whole purpose is to make NATO a strike force, a strong strike force that can go to war, right? That's what he's going to do. And Trump is not necessarily going to play along, right? Trump has already said that basically the US will revisit its relationship to NATO, which kind of means that we don't need to be in NATO, right? Right now, the US has like a vast vastly the largest part of the defense budget of NATO, right? It's almost just entirely the US, and then it's like Germany, France, UK, like the smaller parts, right? And Turkey, forget about it. Turkey is the second largest military in NATO, but it's not even really nobody even counts on Turkey when anything happens, right? Everybody knows Turkey's playing his own game. Turkey's not going to be part of any war against common rivals and so on, common opponents and so on, right? So the U.S. is looking to leave, kind of maneuver itself out. And there were some rumors that right away Mark Rutte came and said that if the Trump administration drops Zelensky, then we're gonna kick the U.S. out of NATO. Okay, we're gonna kick the U.S. out of NATO. Okay, so basically, I mean, what kind of NATO would it be without the U.S.? This is the world we live in. These are massive transformations happening right now. Massive transformations, completely crazy, unpredictable or unforeseen, rather, transformations that we're seeing in today's world. And these things are happening right now. So this guy, he's going to be an opponent, and he's going to stand his ground. He's going to stand his ground, and if necessary, he's going to set up NATO as even without the U.S., and there's going to be a lot of tensions between them. Now, the next thing, it's not like, obviously, is the U.S. going to completely leave? No, probably the U.S. is obviously going to have some type of, maybe just pull back a little bit, or maybe just, change the Article 5 a little bit so that it's not anymore a necessary thing that they have to, just kind of loosen a little bit, right? This is kind of the likely scenario, but with a lot of resistance and a lot of pushback, right, from the Europeans specifically, under the leadership of these kind of people that I mentioned right now, right? The Starmers, the Macrons, and the others who are all kind of very firmly still in the globalist camp, right? They're all kind of working with the globalists, with the World Economic Forum, and so on. So now, who else do we got? Let's move on to some like not so friendly folks, right? Not so friendly folks. I mentioned Nicolas Maduro before. Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, right? He's really important. Why? Because, well, with the shift to America first as a guiding doctrine for the U.S., right? And with the acceptance of the multipolar world order, it becomes doubly important for the U.S. to assert itself in the Western Hemisphere, right? To kind of control the Western Hemisphere, which means controlling South America, Central and South America, right? This is kind of the new Monroe Doctrine, which is the new Trump Doctrine, which is a kind of the new Monroe Doctrine, right? Controlling the Western Hemisphere, not allowing the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians to enter into the South American, Central American space in any way or shape whatsoever, right? This is going to be very important for Trump, for the second Trump administration. You can already see that in a lot of the decisions that they made, putting Marco Rubio as a foreign secretary, right? The hardcore kind of guy who's like focused on Cuba and Venezuela and that, right? And just listen to people like the several other people that he's put into place, Waltz and others that he has put into place, right? This is kind of a very common tenor, a choir with something that keeps coming back in the discourse. And now, if you look into the relationship here with Maduro, so Maduro is important because he stands in the way, right? He's the most vocal opponent in South America. He's the most vocal opponent. And when you look at him, Trump we have actually the birth time for him as well. Trump places his Pluto and his Mars, Trump's Pluto and Trump's Mars, in Maduro's fourth house. You can see this here, right? Fourth house is my home, right? My home country, my home, my land, my territory. And Trump is coming heavy with Mars and Pluto, right? He places his Mars and Pluto in Maduro's fourth house. Like basically, he's coming into his territory with, loaded with special forces, with Navy SEALs, right? With whatever kind of, armed forces. This is indicated in their chart, right? Trump is going to be sending forces And you saw that previously as well when I showed you that his Mars line, Trump's Mars line, goes through Caracas as well, right? So Maduro can get ready for a lot of action, right? Some different type of action there. Now, is he going to be ousted? This is another topic. We're going to look at it in different videos, right? Completely different videos. We're going to look at what's happening in South America. There's a lot of karma there around the Bolivarian movement, right? There's an old repetitive historical karma and the desires and dreams of people who want to bring about a new Bolivarian republic in the north of South America specifically, right? Is that going to happen? Is that going to be something that can stand up to Trump? We're going to have to look at that in future, right? So other videos and other analyses in future. Now let's look at the next person. And the next person is Claudia Sheinbaum. Claudia Sheinbaum, who's this? This is the president of Mexico, okay? Claudia Sheinbaum. She was just recently, she came into power, and she came into power in a really crazy election where I think 40 or 50 candidates on local levels, on different levels, were shot, like were killed, assassinated. By who? By the cartels. The cartels own everything there. They're massive, right? There's these huge cartels that are equipped like a high-end military, and they operate like super professional, and they take out anybody, you know, the politicians in Mexico, unless they arrange themselves with the cartels, they're done. They get taken out, you know, like those people have no, they're ruthless, right? So now in this election, she came to power and now she has some issues. Why? Because Trump, one of the first things he said, and he kept repeating, is that we're going to take out all the cartels. We're going to take out all the cartels in the US and in Mexico too. If the Mexicans can't do it, we will do it, right? We will take out the cartels. They're bringing fentanyl, they're bringing drugs, you know, they're getting richer by sending drugs into the US, right? And that can't happen. So how does she feel about that? Like, what is she gonna do? The cartels are gonna be like, okay, can you stop this guy? If not, you're gone. We put somebody else, right? We put somebody else except, you know, besides, you know, to do this instead of you. Now, when you look at her chart, it's kind of written in there as well that she's not going to have a good time with Trump. Like, you could kind of see that in her speech that she gave when she was kind of congratulating Trump. She was trembling, you know. She was like, yeah, it's coming, but we're a sovereign country. Mexico is a sovereign country. We're going to stay a sovereign country. She was saying that in her congratulation notice for Trump, you know. It's like, okay, that's, we got it. Okay, so, but you see, like, look, she has her Saturn is opposite the Pluto of Trump, and her North Node is on Pluto. North Node, her, you know, her karmic lesson or lesson in life in what she has to do this time is going to be to face the extreme and immense and overwhelming power of Trump. This is her karmic lesson. Like, her North Node is on Trump's Pluto, right? With Saturn up, and in the process, her own structures will break down, right? Her own structures are going to crumble and break down. Okay, this is her karma. This is not very nice, right? So what other possibilities are there for realizing this? Is she completely helpless? Is she going to stand by and, you know, let Trump come in and, you know, destroy the cartels, in the process herself and all her whatever, or family, who God knows what, right? God forbid, but that's what happens in Mexico, right? So what is she gonna do? What is she gonna do? There are a couple of other options here. I mentioned this in some previous videos where I looked at the eclipses and how the eclipse, the last big eclipse, it went exactly over Mexico and the US. And I looked at the ingress chart, the April, you know, the ingress chart. And, you know, long story short, there is some other scenarios where Mexico gets proactive and starts to partner up with global US adversaries. Okay, this should be taken seriously by everybody, right? Both sides. I mean, I'm not gonna, you know, it's not like I'm analyzing what's happening here, right? So on all sides, there is no necessarily taking sides here, but you know, this is a real possibility where you're going to see especially Russian interests and Russian military or strategic interests being placed in Mexico as a counterweight, right? As a way to kind of counteract what otherwise may be coming at Mexico in these next 4 years, right? In the second Trump administration. Again, this warrants its own video with its own analysis, right? Actually, there's so many of these. We did all of these little pieces in this video. They have to be their own videos. Tell me in the comments which of these you want to see next. I always, if I have enough pressure from viewers, then sometimes I kind of, push a particular topic higher up in the list, right? So let me know in the comments what you want to see next from all of these things that we talked about, what you want to see the deep dive into, right? Also, while we're at it, again, just a reminder to like and comment and help to push this video and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And also look in the comments below if you want analysis for yourself. We can work together. We can find ways to optimize your strategies, navigate for yourself better with knowing the patterns that are coming, both materially, financially, as well as spiritually and holistically, right? Okay, now let's look at the next position. Let's look at the next synastry as we're kind of moving away from the allies. We're moving into more and more problematic territory. Actually, still we have one, ally, maybe the biggest ally in some ways, right? At least when you listen to the rhetoric that is coming out of the Trump camp and, the second Trump administration was Netanyahu, right? So this was kind of very unmistakable. It was kind of repeated again and again that this is Israel, America's first ally, and now Israel is going to have all the support, even far more than before, right? And you got to ask yourself, why are they doing that? In some ways, it's quite clear that Trump wouldn't have gotten so far as he did if he didn't have that support, right? Because Trump, he had everybody against him. He had the deep state, he had everybody against him. Media, mass media, big tech, right? He needed an ally. And he has karmic history with this particular ally. Again, we can do another video on this and we can look at Trump's past lives and at the US karma, because he's somebody who for many, actually he has been incarnated, his soul has been incarnated on American soil since the beginning, since kind of the first settlers went to US, right? He has been intertwined with the US history. It's not just him, it's like the US collective karma in many ways, but him specifically too, is very intertwined with the karma of Israel, right? Of the Jews and of Israel specifically now, right? And you can see that again and again. He has in his family, obviously, like his family is he has Kushner in his family, Ivanka, and so on and so forth. His other sons as well, right? His sons too are married into Jewish families, but you can see that here in the chart. Well, the two of them, Netanyahu and Trump, they are, on the one hand, like they're gonna feel really well together, right? You can see here the karmic connection that they have, right? Again, we can go in much deeper into this in future, but you can see the karmic connection. But then also, they're gonna get along really well. They're gonna have like a blast when they're together, right? They will enjoy each other's company a lot. But then there's also a lot of rivalry here. Mars on Mars exact, okay? And then Mercury square Mercury, like they're gonna be arguing a lot. And there's also, just maybe friendly arguments, but there's a lot of rivalry here too. There's some sense of rivalry. Mars exact conjunct Mars. Mars is a malefic. When you have Mars on Mars, it's not a good thing. It's not like when you have Venus on Venus. Venus conjunct Venus, great, all same aesthetic, same love. Mars on Mars, there's rivalry, right? So there's some rivalry here. And in addition, Netanyahu puts his Pluto in Trump's 12th house. So when somebody puts their Pluto in your 12th, that person is more powerful than you in almost all cases. That person has certain powers over you, right? They have certain hidden powers over you, right? And it's that's the case here. So Netanyahu, and again, you got to ask yourself, what deals did Trump make to come into power, right? To be able to, obviously he ran an incredible, absolutely revolutionary grassroots campaign with all the real stuff, brought everybody who's real, went on the real platforms, all the social media podcasts and so on and so forth, brought all the real people in his camp. But still, he still had to make some deals too at the end of the day, right? Some deals that we don't know about. And who did he make them with? That's who he made them with, right? And this is going to show itself in the coming time. This is going to show itself. You're going to see him always give in. You're going to see him, even though they will be rival, there's going to be some rivalry between them, right? Because why is it rivalry? Because there's also another way of thinking about this. When Netanyahu came and addressed the Senate, right? He was hailed like, more than any president, more than any U.S. president, he was hailed like the savior, God forbid. He was hailed like some kind of legendary figure who's everybody wanted to get a kiss the ring, right? When he came to Senate. And Trump sees that, and Trump's like, okay, wait, this is my country, this is my place. Like, what are you doing? And there's going to be rivalry between them, right? There's going to be a certain rivalry between they're the kind of characters that there's going to be this rival. Netanyahu somehow sees himself secretly as the secret leader of the U.S. too, even though it's a long story. Again, if you want to see more on this, let me know in the comments. We go into this into much more detail. Now, let's move ahead. Let's see the next one. NATO. Okay, Trudeau. I'm gonna skip Justin Trudeau. I'm gonna skip Justin because there's not that interesting. He's gonna play ball. He's gonna be okay, and he's not that interesting. I looked into it, but let's get to the juicy part. Let's get to our the place where, as we saw in the Astrocartography, Trump has his Mars line, right, and his adversaries. Let's get to China and Russia. So, first one is Xi Jinping. Okay, we're gonna look at Xi Jinping. Trump to Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping, very interesting. Actually, these guys are really similar in many ways. Very, very, very similar, right? So, sun on sun, right? Sun on sun. They really have like the same character. Mercury on Mercury, right? They can speak with each other. They're gonna, they can really get each other when they speak. And there's some, there's this similarity here where they are essentially, like, there's also a lot of, when you look at the guy's history, Xi Jinping, right? He's a self-made man. He was a street fighter, right? He was like literally a street fighter. He had a gang, and he was organizing folks and stuff, and then he was a self-made kind of businessman, and in that Chinese context, he built himself up pretty big, and he built up all these connections, and he kind of mirrors Trump in many ways. He's the Chinese Trump in many, not like he wasn't obviously a tycoon. He's a tycoon now, after war, right? He wasn't before. But in many ways, there's a lot of respect between them. You can see that when Trump talks about it. He always says, she came like this, and I can sit down with him. Nobody else can sit down with him. He always says that, right? And it's kind of right, because they really get each other. But then there's also this intense streak here. Really, really intense. So they have Moon on Pluto, right? And then again, Pluto in the 12th. So Xi Jinping has this secret power over Trump. What is this secret power? In this case, it's economic power, right? So Xi Jinping, China has a lot of economic power over the US, even though it's the US that is going to introduce tariffs and everything. Trump wants to introduce tariffs, but nonetheless. And this is a very emotionally entangled, deep relationship where it's going to be like a lot of blackmailing and a lot of kind of, manipulation both ways, right? But in some ways, you got here, Xi Jinping has his Saturn on Jupiter, on Trump's Jupiter. Xi Jinping is trying to throttle and block and hinder Trump's activities in some ways, right? But does that mean there's open hostility? Not really. You don't see the markers of open hostility here. This is much more of a boardroom type of opponents they really get each other, but they're also playing for for rival teams, and they're gonna manipulate behind the scenes and stuff against each other, right? But you don't see, this is not a chart that shows you open hostility, right? So open hostilities taken off the table, even though circumstances might pull them into a situation where their countries are, on different sides, but it's not the relationship between them directly that leads to those open hostilities, right? It's not the relationship between their governments that they represent, which is always the leader who represents that government. If you look at the chart of that leader, you understand that government. It's not that relationship that leads into direct conflict, right? So what is then? What is? We can look at, well, obviously the elephant in the room. Before we look at Putin, let's also briefly look at Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un, Trump always kind of was saying that I get along with him really well. He was always saying we get along really well. And you can see that. You can see that. He has here, they have a Jupiter on Moon, okay? Moon on Jupiter. So they do get along very well. They're going to have fun together. But this is just surface. This is just surface level. Actually, they also have Pluto, Saturn square, and Sun, Saturn opposition. Actually, this relationship is going to get very difficult. Very difficult, okay? So it starts off as being a very kind of, they're going to be fun and let's meet and so on and so forth, but it's going to get very difficult. Very karmically difficult relationship, okay, between the two of them. But let's move on to I think what you're waiting for maybe, what we started this video talking about. Obviously, everybody's worried about what's happening in Ukraine, Russia right now. Ukraine, Russia, right? What's happening there? And that situation, with Trump coming into the picture, has the potential to completely change, obviously, right? Because, well, Trump was not, with it. Like from the beginning, again, as I said at some point in this video, it was the English, the British, who was pushing this more than anybody, right? Without Boris Johnson flying to Ukraine, right, and convincing Zelensky not to sign the peace treaty. Zelensky was ready to sign the peace treaty in Istanbul. They went to Istanbul, they met, they said, okay, fine, I'm ready to sign. The Brits flew there and they told him not to do this. And since then, the war has escalated. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, right? Hundreds of thousands more because, well, the globalists didn't want to give up at that point. They didn't want a strong Russia, right? They didn't want a strong Russia. They wanted to contain Russia. And since then, all of Ukraine basically has been bought up by BlackRock and Vanguard and these other massive capital-based companies. And Trump, with him coming in, there was a lot of talk of things changing. A lot of talk of things changing. Trump said, like, I'm not going to pay more money. Ukraine already received $200 billion from the U.S. in aid, and that's it. That's going to end now. And you can see that here when you look at their charts, that Trump, he's going to be very strict with Zelensky. And then on the other hand, they also have this trust. They have an incredible trust going on. Also, Trump always says this. He says, like, Zelensky could have played cute, but he didn't. When I asked him, when they had this hoax thing going, when I called him, right, in the beginning, before the war started, right? Because there's a lot of trust going on here too. Like, Zelensky is going to trust him. He's going to trust him. He's going to respect him a lot, right? He's going to respect Trump a lot. But then Trump puts his Pluto in direct opposition to Zelensky's sun. You see here? This is, basically Trump is going to grill the guy. He's going to grill him and he's going to place ultimatums for him. And he's going to be like, he's going to put him into an extremely difficult situation. Pluto opposite, all of his power, Trump's power goes into basically transforming Zelensky, right? Telling Zelensky that you need to change, you can't do what you're doing, game is over. Also you see here, Saturn on Mars, right? So stopping each other's activities, cutting each other's activities short. You can see this in actually what happened, or one anecdote is that Trump, apparently from the Trump team, there came a message that Zelensky from now on, if he wants to meet Trump, he has to wear a suit and tie, no more t-shirt, right? So you can see it, but this is just surface. Obviously, it's just surface level. Much more importantly, Trump is going to make very clear to Zelensky that game is over. Right, the game is over. Now you're not, we don't need you to act this role anymore, which you've been acting for the last couple of years, whatever Hollywood spin doctors came to you and told you to play this role as the action hero so you can get more money from the world, that's over now. Now you're gonna wear a suit and tie and sit down and shut up, right? This is what Trump is gonna tell him. Your role is over. If you want to keep your life, because the guy also, embezzled like, $1 billion. He's a billionaire now. Zelensky has $1 billion in private wealth, and he has mansions in Florida and Switzerland, right? Where from? From being an actor? No, from getting aid from the world, right? He's been getting aid from the world. So that's going to end. But if this ends, how does it end? How does it end, right? Does it end with Ukraine's demise? I've been predicting this also since the beginning of the year for this current time, and it's starting looking like it's exactly happening in this time, that Ukraine is going to be split. Ukraine is going to be split. There's going to be a western part owned by BlackRock and Vanguard. There's going to be an eastern part owned by Russia, right? And that's what it looks like right now. But in which time frame? And is it going to happen without taking the whole world down, right? This is the big question. Now, the main, the elephant in the room, the main relationship that we've all been waiting for to look at, obviously, is the relationship between Trump and Putin. That's the one that we need to look at. That's the determining relationship of our age, of our time. This is a relationship that is important, that historians will look at in decades to come. In decades to come, historians will analyze this relationship, right? And if they, by that time, if they have an understanding of karma and of astrology and of spiritual background, they're gonna do the same thoughts that we're doing here now. This is gonna be the conversation, right, in the future. So when you look at these guys, there is, on the one hand, there is a lot of trust here. There's a lot of trust for each other, right? And you can see that they kind of, they even were always accused of backing each other. The American media was always accusing Putin of backing Trump in the elections, right? And, these guys are going to have a lot of respect and a lot of trust for each other, no doubt about it. But then, that being said, Putin puts his Mars on Trump's moon sun. You see that here? Okay. And on his south node. Okay. So Putin is basically, he's a karmic rival. He's a karmic rival and karmic enemy. He's not, their destiny is going to lead to a confrontation. It's written in the chart, right? His Mars is on his north node, south node axis, triggering both his moon and his sun, right? That's one thing. And then we got here Pluto on Mars. Okay, this is unfortunate, right? Pluto on Mars. When you have Pluto on Mars, this means that these people can get into a battle for life and death, right? They can get into a battle for life and death where nobody will be spared. No costs, nothing is too much. When you have Pluto and Mars together like that, it's a sign of a battle that goes on till the bitter end, right? And that's what's in their chart. So we got this here. Pluto is on the Mars. Actually, when you switch it around, let me just switch it. So when you switch this around, then you put Putin first and then Trump, okay? What you get is, you're going to see that here, Trump puts his Mars on Putin's MC as well. You see this here on MC, right? And with the Pluto. So Trump's aggressive style, right, is going to directly attack the public standing and the final destiny of Putin. Okay, so this, right, obviously there's much more to look at here, right? Because this is just an initial synastry. We have to look at so many other charts here to really understand the intricacies. Usually I add all the asteroids and I look into progressions and into the composite Davison chart and so on, combined charts and so on. And all of that we can do and we have to do to understand when this is going to play out and how it's going to play out. But as a recap at this point, for all the analysis that we did right now, right? As a recap, we have to say that even though Trump is going to limit Zelensky, Trump is going to put Zelensky in his place, even though Trump is going to somehow find a level of understanding with Xi Jinping, right? And even though he has a lot of respect for Putin, there is a karmic script in the program, in the cosmic program, right, for Putin and Trump to clash on the highest level, on the global stage, to clash on the global stage, right, in a way that involves political violence, right? So now, what does that mean for everybody else? We already talked about, the Europeans. They're gonna kind of splinter off, and then they're kind of driving the war. They're kind of driving more the confrontation with Russia than Trump right now. It's true. Trump is trying to stay out of it. But what happens later? What happens after a year or two? What happens if after a year or two, once we get into that dangerous zone, 25, 26, when the Neptune, Saturn conjunction comes in Aries, which we've been talking about a lot. Yeah, in that time when we're going to have this incredible confusion around borders, around states, around, we're going to have these emergence of these new fanatic movements and wars, right? All of that stuff starts to happen. And then the entanglements get more. And then Israel starts to kind of go ballistic around everybody there, pulling everybody into the conflicts. Right? Europe and Russia starts to get more and more, into a hot war across different fronts. Can the U.S. stay out? Can they indefinitely stay out? Or is it going to be like a situation like similar to the Second World War, where the U.S. was supposed to stay out, but then at some point decided to come in? Pretty late, but decided to come in, right? Because of circumstances. So those are all possibilities that are on the table. They're on the table. We have the advantage of, in addition to understanding the geopolitics and the economics and the analyses, right, on these kind of strategic analysis, we have, in addition, the karmic cycles, the archetypal cycles that we can understand as well. So let's continue the analysis together. We have to really be vigilant in this coming time. People have asked me if this is a necessary outcome. It's not. Obviously, there's zones of probabilities here, but we can see how mature humanity is right now. And based on how mature humanity is, there are certain outcomes that are very, very likely right now. And unfortunately, the outcomes that look very, very likely for us, they include and they involve a large-scale global confrontation, and nothing has changed about that with Trump's election. In fact, Trump is the person who came in place for the final pieces now to come into place for that large-scale confrontation that I've been talking about on this channel. So what can we do? We can look after our own families, and we can make sure that we are set up, we are safe, and we know where we are. We know, we have some type of resilient networks and resilience built into our life, in the way that we design our finances, in the way that we design our basic necessities of where we are, how we live, how we protect ourselves. And we can work spiritually together with other seekers on raising the consciousness of humanity, right? This is not some woo crazy stuff, right? There is some reality to this, because we can influence. We're not just passive people who have to step back and watch, all this horrible stuff is going to happen, right? We can have an influence as well. We can work on the consciousness level with others together to raise the consciousness, right? To raise the spiritual maturity of humanity, so that we don't have to see the worst possible outcomes of the upcoming patterns, of the upcoming cycles. We can work on that too. All of that we can do together as well on this channel. So make sure to be in the loop, like this video, and comment, and go and check out all of the different things that are coming up for Ultra Sapient. Take care of yourselves for now. Be well and be blessed.